This episode of Doom Patrol continues, what this show has been doing from the beginning, which is, slow character building and slow character development with its main characters. However, unlike a lot of other Doom Patrol episodes that have focused usually on one character to take up a whole episode or most of the whole episode, this episode split. Francis Patrol, it kind of split the focus between three different groups of characters, and we got to see a lot of characters being developed alongside each other with their individual issues, right? This episode I felt was squarely mostly on the characters of Robotman, Cyborg, and Negative Man. And, the other characters were in there too, but I think the main focus was about those three and being split alongside, three different storylines. And I think that because this episode, I think, broke up the narratives between like three different, groups of people or three different characters being the focus of three different storylines, that it did make the pacing of this episode a bit faster than some of those other Doom Patrol episodes that would do, like a character-specific episode focused on just one character taking up the whole show, usually. So this made this episode, I think, a bit more, I guess, not as slow as some of the other ones. It's a bit faster. So I do think this is one of the better episodes, although I'm not saying that those slow episodes were bad. They were still fine. It's just, this one I felt picked up the pace because it divided the screen time up a little bit better throughout. In the Robotman plot, storyline where Cliff, with Rita as tagging along with him, went, to Florida to see if he can connect with his daughter Clara, whom he finds out is alive, after, her adoptive father appears to have been killed by, eaten by an alligator. That was the more Cliff Robotman-centric part of it. And I did think it was interesting how he was not able to actually confront or face his daughter to tell her, I'm your father. And I understand why that was difficult for him. And Rita was right to tell him, you just got to do it. I mean, she was being a supportive friend. I think that Rita's advice towards him in this episode was good, but I still see why he couldn't do it. I mean, how do you tell your daughter, you're a giant robot hulking guy? It's like, hey, I'm your dad. It's like she would have looked at him like he's crazy. I just think that I can totally understand why he had problems doing it. And this is a girl who has no relationship with him anymore and seemed to like her current dad. I think he felt, inferior as a parent, even though it wasn't his fault that he died. I mean, if it were up to him, he would still be alive and raising his daughter. But because of circumstances, that it happened, he wasn't able to. So even though he blames himself, I don't think he was to blame. I mean, he didn't want he didn't want to die. I mean, like I was saying, he'd like to have been a father to his daughter, but because circumstances worked out the way that they did, he didn't. He wasn't her father. He didn't have a relationship with her as, a father is supposed to have with his child. And so I think, he didn't have any confidence and didn't feel like it was ready, and he just didn't know how to approach her. I feel like, maybe he should have, and maybe he put it off for the reasons I said. Maybe he should have worked out a plan on how he would tell her that, he was his father. Even though he wasn't a flesh and blood man anymore, it might have been difficult for him to prove it to her. And, I think maybe he should have, if he had wanted to and really tried to, he could have done it. He could have been prepared, he could have been ready, but he just couldn't. Although, this is probably not the last time we'll see of Clara, because, she's still alive, and, Cliff does leave her that watch that she was talking about that she thought was in the belly of that alligator. So, it's possible that in the next 2 or 3 episodes, Cliff and Clara might have some kind of a reunion or, just meeting, rather than the one that they had in this episode. And I also thought it was interesting how when he and Rita were in that swamp looking for that alligator, Rita was acting like, I don't want to die in this swamp, whatever. And I was thinking, the Elastic Girl from the comics, the Elastic Woman in the comics, is strong enough to fight off some alligator. And I thought that they were working towards the Elastic Girl in the show, the Rita Farr in the show being there too, but I guess she's not there yet. I do think that she's strong enough to take care of an alligator. I guess because she can't control her powers, but I mean, if her skin stretches and stuff, I mean, I don't think the alligator could actually, really bite her or eat her because her skin would stretch rather than tear. I think she could survive an alligator attack. But, I guess it's just her not being confident enough in her abilities. And, Cliff could too. I mean, I think Cliff, as he's portrayed in the show, Robotman, he's strong enough to withstand an alligator too. And he did, right? We saw that alligator leap out of the water in a very like a over the top and unrealistic way. And he attacked the alligator attacked Cliff, but he survived because he took that watch out of the alligator to leave it to Clara. So Robotman is tough enough to handle it. The Larry storyline, this continues what was obvious in the episode where he and Cyborg went to Danny Street. The negative spirit is totally trying to be his therapist and force him, guide him, or push him, or outright force him to face who he is and live his life more confidently and truthfully as a gay man in the world, which is something he wasn't able to do. He hasn't able to do in the past that much. I mean, I don't think that he's in the closet necessarily. I feel that Larry has always known and acted and behaved as a gay man. I don't think it was something he was like trying to deny or suppress, but he didn't feel confident enough to be open about it with people. I mean, it's not like he was like, no, I'm not really gay, I'm straight. I think he always knew he was gay, and he, lived privately as a gay man, but just wasn't confident enough to really live his life and embrace it. And I think the negative spirit is trying to make him do that with all these visions with John and, compelling him to actually see John in person after a gajillion years, which is what happens at the end of this episode. And so this was a very good episode or journey for Larry. A good, evolution for him as a person. And so I'm wondering, now that he's done this and he's kind of expressed his feelings, both in these visions to himself and in person with John, now that John and he are older men, just in time, in reality, is a negative spirit done? It's like, okay, I'm finished. I don't have any more to do for you. You face things. You're more embracing and accepting of who you are. So how is this going to change his relationship with the negative spirit? The negative spirit will be like, I don't need to do this anymore. We can be like friends and fight crime together a bit more cooperatively. So I'm just curious going forward in future episodes and future seasons, what the dynamic between him and his negative spirit is going to be like. Because the negative spirit's primary purpose, I think, to help Larry face himself. It seems like that might be mission accomplished, or there might not be too many more steps to do in that vein. So what else are they going to do down that path with him and his negative spirit, their interactions and stuff? And as for Cyborg, it does become more obvious that with him, the reason that Cyborg is being kind of wigging out and being funky sometimes and having problems is because Grid is taking over more and more of him. And, can he control Grid? And is Grid going to turn into, because in the comic books, an evil version of Cyborg is called Grid, and I think the show is going for that. And so I think the episode of Cyborg versus Grid, or the Doom Patrol versus Grid, a Grid-controlled Cyborg, is coming at some point in this season, or maybe next season. Although I think it's going to be this season, because I don't think they're going to introduce this and not, have that come to a head in the same season instead of saving it for season 2. They could save it for season 2, but I don't think they are. I think that the Doom Patrol versus Grid, or Grid/Cyborg, is coming sooner rather than later. And I think that the Bureau of Normalcy, now that they've, captured Cyborg, which we saw at the end of this episode with Darren Cross saying, who works for the Bureau, I'm Darren Cross, and, he's tied in that chair Cyborg is, they're probably going to speed up that process and try to use Cyborg, get into his programming and mess with him in Grid to turn him evil, to use him as a weapon against the Doom Patrol in the next 2 or 3 episodes. Because I think the last Doom Patrol episode is May 24th, which is only 3 so I think there's 3 or 4 episodes left of Doom Patrol. So I think, the Grid plot is going to reach its climax and conclusion very soon. But all in all, I did like this episode a lot. I thought that it did did justice by the 3 main characters I mentioned who were the focus. Cyborg, Negative Man, and Robotman. And I don't think that the show is finished. I mean, even though there are some important character building events, there's still more to do with them in future episodes of this season, and I'm excited to see what we see with them. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it on YouTube and subscribe to the channel because I appreciate your viewership, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.